Hey everybody, this is Dan Keldsen, Chief Innovation Officer with InfoCap.ai. And this episode of Next Future Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Lamont Black, founder of Wide Open Ventures. He is also a research fellow with Filene Research Institute, which is a think tank for credit unions. And if you are a credit union, you have undoubtedly heard of them. And if you have not, then you should absolutely jump on the web and find out more about them. They do very pragmatic, experiment-focused work to test out things before credit unions decide to try to implement things. Really interesting mix of how they do research, which can tend to be very abstract and more pure academic, like theoretical, but is actually meant to be applicable because it's run by and for credit unions, which is just fascinating. It's one of the many things that is interesting to me about credit unions. His work is very focused on the future of credit unions, or credit union 2.0 is sometimes how it's talked about. So that lines up with a lot of my past, which comes from Enterprise 2.0, which is sort of the precursor to this 15, 20, almost 20 years ago at this point. So how do innovations get brought in? What's the right amount of money to be spent on that? What do you do with legacy systems that may be getting in the way of trying to modernize or do a digital transformation is sometimes how that's talked about. So as you can imagine, very exciting for me to talk to Lamont, because this is sort of a sweet spot of an area that I personally care about, as well as the work that we do through InfoCap. So without further ado, let's make it happen. All right. So, Dr. Lamont Black, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. It's a pleasure to see you in person. Well, not in person, but, as close to in person as we can get from 1,000 miles or so difference. But welcome to Next Future Today. Really looking forward to finding out more about you than I could read in the voluminous materials that you have out there on the web.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to join you.
Yeah. Part of how I found you is, for me, as Chief Innovation Officer at InfoCap.ai, we have a partnership which sounds similar to what you're doing with Filene. This is with the Digital Business Institute, which is part of the Questrom School of Business at Boston University, one of the longest possible names of a institution that I can imagine. And it's we believe in academic and commercial joint partnership of sorts to really try to dive into things and cover the bases on from an academic rigor standpoint, as well as from a commercial standpoint or government work, other things that we're doing. But we've been looking into credit unions and how do we serve them most effectively. The team stumbled onto the Filene Research Institute. What is that? How did you get involved? And, some of our audience will be credit unions, but some will not. So I just want to make sure we have our bases covered.
Sure. Yeah. So the Filene Research Institute is like a think tank for the credit union industry. So self and other fellows, we do research on the credit union movement, both looking at the past, trying to understand where it came from, how credit unions have grown and evolved. Ed Filene was one of the founders of the credit union movement here in the US. But my center is called the Credit Union of the Future. So it's really focused on the future of the credit union movement around innovation, technology. Credit unions are unique organizations. So for those folks who don't know, they don't have traditional investors like a commercial bank. The members are the owners of the credit union. So it's a cooperative. So it's a unique group of people and institutions that really is, I think, doing some good work trying to improve people's lives through financial services.
So you have a PhD in economics, so you're an economist by training. It's possible. I did a little records management work for the Federal Reserve Bank quite a while ago. We could have passed each other at some point. That would have been interesting. Pop back in time. So what got you interested in credit unions specifically? There's a whole world of things in economics that you could pursue. Why credit unions for you?
Yeah, so my background, so I used to live in Washington, D.C., worked for the Fed there through the financial crisis, came here to Chicago, DePaul around 2013. It was 2022 that I got introduced to the credit union movement. So there's an organization called NASCUS that works with credit unions on regulatory issues. A guy named Brian Knight found me through a referral, invited me to give a webinar. That led to a speaking engagement with the California Nevada Credit Union League on crypto. So a lot of my work with credit unions in the early 2022 period was around crypto, Bitcoin. Some credit unions were starting to offer Bitcoin to their members through a custodial service. And I would say that kind of then evolved. Most of my work now with credit unions is around artificial intelligence and other types of technology. And Filene was, they've been around for a long time. They're obviously a big part of the credit union movement. We connected, I think, in 2023 and started working together. So I've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Okay. And I'm not a member yet, still trying to figure out what's the right path for us. But the titles of the research that you've produced are certainly intriguing. I want to jump back a little bit in time. Apparently, last Christmas you gave a talk on a credit union carol, which I thought would be an interesting. I mean, it caught my attention, and it's a shame I couldn't find any video of the actual presentation. But I love tying in stories to illustrate points, because I can get very geeky on technology stuff, especially. But most people don't necessarily want that. So, what's the tale of the three ghosts of credit unions that you talked about in that presentation?
Yeah, that was a fun presentation. I've got a team at Wide Open Ventures. We put that together. Ryan Best was a big part of that. So what we did was we kind of took that traditional story, the Christmas Carol, and turned it into Credit Union Carol. Instead of Ebenezer Scrooge, it was Ebenezer Steadfast, our initial character of a credit union CEO who's got a good heart, but a little bit stuck in his ways. This is the way we've always done things. And so he's visited by Christmas past, and it's a member, and he sees this kind of story of this woman, Jane, who's trying to get a new loan, and the credit union just isn't able to work with her because they don't have the technology to really process the application, understand her data, or really personalize that loan to her in a way that would fit her needs. And so she ultimately ends up having to walk away from the credit union. So you kind of start with that sadness story. And then gradually I got into some of the research I've been doing around payments, again, artificial intelligence, how credit unions can use these technologies to better serve their members. And so then as you go through Christmas present and into Christmas future, Ebenezer has this kind of epiphany of oh, well, technology isn't something that's just happening out there. It's not just a threat or a disruption. That's something that I adopt to better serve my members, like Jane. And so ultimately she does get her needs met by the credit union, and you get this kind of happy ending.
I love the concept, and it reminds me, for me, I do my best writing when I channel. I studied music and songwriting specifically. So when I remember, if I can summarize something in a catchy title, then that means that I have a good chance that the rest of it will be intriguing, right? So it's, these days we're all trained to click on clickbait kind of stuff. So it's tied to that, hopefully at a higher level. I'm praying.
Yeah, I think storytelling is important. That's how people learn. That's how they engage. And so if you want to introduce new concepts, sometimes telling a good story is a way to do that.
And I think of any aspect of financial services, credit unions seem like the place to tell stories too, because if it is about you have some membership association, there's a reason why you're part of that particular credit union, because there's almost 5,000, I believe, in the U.S., 4,600, something like that. And there could be all sorts of reasons why you join any one of them, but that core, there's got to be some story, I would imagine, that really is sort of that unifying piece for every member of credit union.
Yes. And the employees. One thing I love about working with credit unions is all the people I meet, they're full of stories about how they got involved with credit unions, different work they've done to serve both members and communities. And there are literally stories of people who started as a teller and worked their way all the way up to CEO, now running some of these credit unions. And you don't hear those stories as often in commercial banking. And I think with credit unions, they have this very kind of family social environment, which is part of what I love about it. I would say they would acknowledge that sometimes they can get a little bit internal and insular, not always kind of looking to those bigger trends on the horizon. So I feel like that's part of my role in the industry, is helping them kind of pick up their heads sometimes and look around to see where things are headed.
Yeah, and it's funny that, so there's tons of innovation in financial services, but there's also, it's like a yin and yang kind of thing. It doesn't matter what size or scale or orientation of the financial services organization. They want to be cutting edge in some ways, but also not at all. So, totally risk averse, but also want to embrace some innovations. And then how do you reconcile that? So what part of the work that you're doing is about maybe a mindset shift, not just, hey, this is the stuff that AI or crypto or blockchain could do for you, but here's what, maybe here's what you're missing because you can't see past the risk, or is there sort of like a behavioral aspect to what you do?
100%. And yeah, one of the credit unions I work with, we did an all staff meeting. So it was about 400 people in an auditorium. And my talk wasn't about AI or crypto, it was about innovation. And like you said, the innovative mindset. How do you bring that to work? Not just doing things the way you've always done them, but looking for new ways to do things. How do I do less of this and more of that? And how do I kind of break some of those traditional molds? And I think technology is now empowering a lot of that thinking. And I also love the word like experimentation. Credit unions, I think, are full of innovative people, but you have to unlock that potential, encourage and even incentivize innovative thinking, that entrepreneurial mindset. And so, yeah, I think that's something that needs to happen at the leadership level, because some of them, I think, are still kind of trying to be overly cautious and protective, but some of it's also at the lower levels, that grassroots innovation. That's where you're getting to really cool ideas.
When I first sort of started wandering around in the innovation space, there was a lot of discussion of, is it always top down that innovation comes because you're directed to innovate? Thou shalt innovate, or something like that. Or is it bottom up, where it's the rebels have decided they've had enough, and like the people that I've talked to at credit unions, that's similar to what you described. They joined for a reason. Maybe as a teller, maybe as a teenager, they joined just like their parents did as members, and they decided they wanted to make that their work. But there's that, I've always been I've never studied improv explicitly, but the yes and concept really resonates with me. So should it be top down, or should it be bottom up? It could be both, right? So, and if you can align those, and they operate in different ways, but if you don't have both, then it just makes everything harder. So, like for me, I used to. I never turned them into real cards, but I used to hand out cards when I did innovation workshops that said, "You have a license to innovate, or license to improve if innovation is too strong for you," right? Or a license to say yes, or a license to say no, or things like that. So someday I'll get to writing a book that's a license to fill in the blank, and it'll be just like the chicken soup for the fill in the blank, infinite potential royalties.
And I think leaders need to be handing those cards to their people to say, we have a culture of innovation that encourages innovation. Even if you're part of innovation, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to fail at times. And if the culture doesn't support that and work through that, people are just going to stay away. So I think it really is a message that has to come from the top.
My vision there was, if you had a deck of cards in a conference room, then anybody could, you could deal out the cards at the beginning of the meeting, and as things come up, people can say, "Hey, look, I'm going to play the let's brainstorm first card instead of the let's shoot down every idea card," and sort of cancel them out. So I could have a ton of fun with that, which I don't know where that would go. So that's part of the reason I haven't done it. What makes them ripe to be thinking now is the time to specifically become a credit union of the future, and not whatever position we might occupy right now?
Yeah, I think it's the leaders who are looking at the environment we're in and just seeing how quickly things are changing, and not wanting to be caught unaware of some of these emerging trends. If you think about the financial landscape, we talked about crypto, AI, blockchain, I think is part of that, but even real-time payments, embedded finance, open banking, there's just so many things that are happening right now. And I think if credit unions take this mindset of, we're going to stick to our knitting, do things the way we've already done them. I sometimes use the analogy of Blockbuster, just not seeing the Netflix factor approaching, and kind of letting it pass by and then getting caught by it. So I think there are many leaders that are now taking this mindset. They accept that innovation is part of their job, that it's not just managing operations, it's not just proving efficiency, it's really taking some of those fresh steps. And so, many of them invite me in to talk to their leadership teams or talk to their boards, because they know they need a little bit more education around these topics. But it's the strategic planning process where I think this is really now coming into the light. So instead of just having the same strategic pillars from last year and rolling those into the next year, it's like, how do we think about these emerging trends as changing and influencing our strategy going forward.
It doesn't take long talking to people in credit unions before you hear about the bad side of core banking systems. Everything I hear about the core banking system, you have to hollow out the core and get rid of it effectively, or I've heard anything from, I've done a lot of enterprise work, so you see systems just live on forever that should have died quite a long time ago. So a core banking system that's 10 years old or even 28 years old is so far the oldest that I've heard about, which that might as well be like thousands of years outside of the technology realm, right? So how any of the interactions that you've had with credit unions on how they reconcile that, there's this core that literally is kind of the beating heart of the operations of credit unions. How do you, it's clear that it feels dangerous to do surgery on the core when that is your business. How do they balance out this need to protect that, make sure that nothing happens to it, regardless of what they do, and then also innovate on things that are like light years ahead?
I have a lot of conversation with the credit unions around this. I don't think the core is going away or we just replaced. There are some new core providers who I think are starting to innovate in this space. A lot of credit unions I'm working with are in the process of going through core conversion. So they don't want that type of core capture where they just get stuck with old technologies. It's painful, but they are willing to try working with new providers. And I think my recommendation is often, we need this system of record or source of truth, but how do we start building layers on that, like a data warehouse or a data lake, so that we can then do more of the innovation there? You're right. You don't want to be doing surgery on the core, because then you're going to have to work with the vendor, and often that gets sticky and time consuming. But if you're just pulling that core data into your warehouse and then incorporating other types of data, it's really about building that data infrastructure and pipelines so that then you can get it in the hands of your users. One of my big talking points is like, yes, we need data governance to make sure everything is centralized, clean, and accurate, but we want to develop power users so that they're not just constantly trying to query the core or even emailing the business analytics team. They are able to use data to answer their own questions. That's where that type of self-service analytics, that's where I think this is all headed.
Yeah, I see that you write a lot about business intelligence and AI as the new business intelligence, or you have some more clever phrase than that, but it's something close to that.
Yeah, AI is the evolution of analytics. I think with generative AI, it creates this data interface where now I can use plain English, ask my questions, and get answers without having to use some technical software like a Power BI or something like that. And so I think it's going to empower the business user, and we just have to get those tools in the hands of the right people.
Right. Is there a specific role or department or organization within credit unions that you see are the ones that are most likely to embrace this credit union in the future sort of concept and really like master it? Is it a digital transformation officer? Is it what's sort of the responsibilities of, where does that kind of stuff live?
There are credit unions that have like a head of innovation, kind of like yourself. And, those people, one of the things Filene does that I love is the Filene Lab, where they bring together many of those innovation leaders together in a room, and we talk about new innovative opportunities. There's a lot of fintech partnerships and experimentation that come out of that. And so, fintech and Filene, they have really worked on developing those innovative relationships. So I think that's a big part that's already there. Within credit unions, I've seen it in all types of places. Sometimes it's the chief information officer or the chief technology officer that's really experimenting with these newer technologies, but sometimes it's the chief strategy officer. One thing that we're now doing through Wide Open Ventures is around AI, trying to meet with every executive and say, what does AI mean for your vertical? And so that includes like the chief financial officer, the chief operations officer. Even though they're not the traditional technology types, this technology isn't just like software that gets pushed across the organization. It needs to be a strategy that's coming from each of those leaders.
It is interesting. I've seen a number of people that are, chief digital officers for credit unions or director of digital and AI, which is I stumbled onto somebody yesterday that's probably one of the coolest titles in credit unions that I've run across. Yeah, that's and what a time to have that position. Yeah, that's like let's be on the literal cutting edge of everything right now. How exciting.
Yeah, because I think data and analytics and AI, they're all connected. And if you think about these like digital platforms that credit unions are developing, you have to have the data to feed the digital platform to do the predictive personalization. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of cool opportunities there.
So there's lean startup, the whole movement there. There's lean thinking, which comes more from manufacturing. And, lean startup is don't build stuff that nobody wants, basically. And lean thinking is get rid of the waste, more or less, right? So waste of extra systems, extra communications, extra materials, all that kind of stuff. I sort of mashed the two together when I was doing much more active consulting, and I called it lean innovation. So like for it was technology teams that are busy putting out fires all the time, just keeping things running, infrastructure stuff that like you shouldn't have to worry about the foundation of your house every day, right? So it's just, there are some things that should be stable enough that you can then use that to build off of and look at things that are in the future, modernizing. So lean innovation, I would go in to help them find, like carve out the Google 20% time kind of concept. You're never going to innovate if you never have time to innovate, and if all your resources are spent on keeping the foundation from crumbling underneath you. Do you see that as how does that get reconciled these days with credit unions? Because there's not infinite money. They don't have the same levers that they could pull that profit-seeking financial services organizations can. How do they walk the line there?
Yeah, I think it's super important because I would say a few years ago, I used to get credit unions saying, well, we can't innovate because we don't have the resources, we don't have the people, we don't have the technology. I think that's become a bit of an excuse to hide behind because with a lot of this newer technology, I think it actually levels the playing field. You don't have to be one of the big global banks to innovate. You can actually innovate in a more agile way. I would say that's a framework that I like. You experiment, you iterate, you get feedback, and then you try it again. There's around automation, I would say an important aspect of this because sometimes in credit unions, people get worried that, well, if we automate different roles, what are our people going to do? And is AI just going to replace our employees? And we love our employees. We don't want to replace them. But to your point, if AI can free up their time by handling some of those more manual, repetitive tasks, the kind of the grind work, then they can start thinking more creatively. So I think that's going to empower people. I think we're going to get higher employee satisfaction because now they're going to be able to dream a little bit and come up with those new ideas.
Yeah, I know, and it's easy to be cynical that, oh, sure, you don't want to you don't want to eliminate headcount. I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're talking about. It seems like an obvious conclusion that that's what you're going to do. But I mean, the kinds of people that we work with, it really is about how can you make the people that you already value even more valuable, get to do I don't know if you're a Dan Pink fan, but from his book Drive, he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if you have those three things, that all combined is a way to unleash a whole lot of energy from your employees. And you want that. You don't want somebody who hates, like, oh, it's Monday again, and oh, thank God, now it's lunchtime. There's got to be some other sort of engagement there that's, for most people, not just doing the same thing day in, day out forever.
Yeah, I like the scarcity mindset versus growth mindset. We're not just fighting over some fixed pie. We're trying to grow the pie. And in the world of credit unions, I think that's about how do we scale more effectively without massively increasing headcount? Because, some credit unions are local community institutions that serve a very specific niche. That's part of the history of the credit union movement. But a lot of credit unions now they have community charters. They're starting to serve counties, multiple counties, some of them even serving across the state. And if you want to expand to that level, you're going to need some of this technology and tools to do that. And so that's kind of leveraging your employee productivity to reach more members. And instead of reducing headcount, it's like, how do we grow and impact more people's lives with the people that we have?
I want to say it's a ripe environment. That's not really what I mean. I mean, it's there's such opportunity there because there is a clear, this is our mission. We're supporting these members, and therefore, until we have all of them, theoretically, our job is not done. Would be my take on it. If we're going to serve our members, we should be serving as many of them as possible, and as wonderful a way as they want to be treated, and support them in that. And it's not going to happen by itself, clearly. So how do you make that happen? Because it's, controlling costs is one thing. As a yes and guy, you want to, for me, I want to impact, yes, the bottom line, and also the top line or the mission, perhaps in this case, so that it's not purely about the bottom line. Because that, to me, that's like the worst possible scenarios if you're only focused on the bottom line.
Credit unions are very much a mission-driven organization. That's where I think with newer generations, my students, like, I want them to understand the credit union movement, to understand that it's not just the bottom line. And credit unions often talk about people helping people. That's part of that communal co-op mentality. But I think what we can't get stuck in is this mindset, well, that means coming into a branch, having a friendly teller, having that personal face-to-face interaction. Because the other fact about younger generations is that many of them are now interacting online through mobile. So how do we personalize that online experience? Like, that's what AI is about, using your data more effectively to tailor and give them the services that are unique to their preferences and needs. And so I think credit unions are waking up to that personalization today is more of an analytics term. And how do we bring that heart of the credit union movement into this digital world?
That sounds like a wonderful soundbite to end on. So I won't push our luck because we're running out of time here. For people that want to find out more about your work, what's the best way for them to find out more, get a hold of you?
Yeah, my website's lamontblack.com. I've got some of my materials there. You can also reach out to me through that website. And then LinkedIn. I'd love for people to reach out, follow, connect, and just get engaged with us. My company's Wide Open Ventures. We've got a monthly newsletter, so you can also find them and subscribe to the newsletter, and we'd love to keep in touch.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Next Future Today. I was wonderful to have a chance to talk to you. I'm quite certain we have not seen the last of each other.
All right. I look forward to it. Thanks,
All
Dan.
right. Thanks, Lamont.